Hi, this is Tanya Frederick, Superintendent of the Monona Grove School District. Thanks for being here today. Today we're going to continue our strategic dialogue around district real estate utilization and long-range planning.
Hey everyone, this is Philip Haven from the Monona Grove School Board. This conversation builds on several months of board discussions, community feedback, enrollment analysis, and facility review work. Our goal is to walk through this information and discuss potential next steps for the district.
As we begin, it's important to ground this discussion in the district's strategic priorities. Every conversation about facilities ultimately connects back to the students and how we best support teaching and learning.
We also know that these decisions impact our staff, our families, and our long-term financial sustainability. So throughout this process, we've been looking at how our buildings, enrollment trends, and resources align with these larger district goals.
This isn't simply a facilities discussion. It's really about ensuring we can continue providing strong academic opportunities while being responsible stewards for our district resources.
This slide outlines the timeline of work that has brought us to today's discussion.
Back in October and November, the board reviewed enrollment projections and capacity studies. Then in December, the board approved the consolidation of Taylor Prairie and Cottage Grove School into a single building and authorized additional planning work, including a broker opinion of value report.
Then in April, the district received and reviewed the broker opinion of value presentation from Colliers, followed by a board work session focused on processing the data in greater depth.
The May board meeting was another opportunity to discuss these findings and consider how they connect to the district's future planning. One component of this work included engaging Colliers to complete a broker opinion of value report.
This report provided information about current market conditions, potential property values, and considerations related to district-owned facilities.
The purpose of gathering this information was not to predetermine any outcome, but rather to ensure the board had accurate data available as part of the future planning conversations.
This slide summarizes the current lease agreement between the district and the City of Monona for the Maywood building.
The agreement runs through June of 2029 and includes annual lease payments and shared maintenance responsibilities.
It's also important contextually to remember that Maywood has not operated as a Monona Grove school for approximately 16 years, and no current students in the district attend school here.
The agreement also includes a strategic revisit clause in year 3, which allows both parties to discuss future considerations and potential adjustments. As part of this work, the district also reviewed broader regional enrollment and demographic trends.
These trends are not unique to Monona Grove. Many districts across Wisconsin, including neighboring districts, are experiencing enrollment shifts, declining birth rates, and changing housing patterns.
One of the pieces of information that we have found is the Madison Public School projections. Even though the City of Madison is expected to grow over the next 25 years, they anticipate that they're going to lose 700 students in the next 5. Population projections and regional demographic studies help provide additional context as we think about long-term facilities needs and sustainability.
I think a couple things that are interesting about the Dane County study where we're showing the results on this slide is that Monona is projected to remain relatively flat. We're going to see a little bit of growth, but it's similar growth to what we've seen in the past 25 years, just over 1,000 people between now and 2050. Cottage Grove, on the other hand, is going to see quite an increase, practically doubling over the next 25 years, which is significantly more growth than they've seen in the past 25. So in our district, we're really expecting to see the vast majority of our population growth in Cottage Grove.
I think also important to note, when this study came out by the Department of Administration, one of the criticisms of it was the differential between Dane County's expected growth that was put out by the Regional Development Group, which is designated as RDG in this, as opposed to the Department of Admin. And you can see there's a difference for Dane County, but the differences between in Monona and Cottage Grove and even the town of Cottage Grove is very similar.
Okay, so the next several slides represent an effort that we've been going through over the past few months, trying to turn over as many stones as we can think of, looking at historical data that we have access to ourselves within the district, as well as data that we can easily get our hands on through state resources, et cetera, to try and best wrap our heads around the enrollment at Winnequa specifically. So we're specifically talking about kindergarten through fifth grade enrollment at Winnequa and trying to understand what's been going on there. One of the things I think is really important to mention as a preamble to this is that none of these data points represent a crystal ball or tell an entire story about what's going to happen in the future. But I think taken together, they can really help both the board, the administration, and the community better understand how Monona's operated over the past 10 or 15 years and how different things like housing, house sales, birth rates, et cetera, have either impacted or not impacted the enrollment at Winnequa. So over the next few minutes, we're going to go through each of these slides, and I'm going to go deep on each one of them for a moment and give some background on what the data represents, where we got the data, and try to help everyone interpret it appropriately. So starting with the resident kindergarten through 5 enrollment at Winnequa. This slide strictly looks at kids who are at Winnequa who live in Monona. So this excludes open enrolled students. This is just our resident kids. And we wanted to focus on that because those are the students that we will continue to serve at Winnequa statutorily, right? We do control to a degree the number of open enrolled students that we bring into the district. And so this represents the trend of enrollment at Winnequa for resident students. 1.2 is we dropped 4K off of most of these charts because 4K tends to be quite volatile and it doesn't necessarily react to housing and birth rates and things in the way that 5K through 5th grade does. The vast majority of our students land at Winnequa by kindergarten, even though they're not required to be there till 1st grade. Whereas year over year, we see variability in 4K enrollment that is not necessarily as explainable through housing trends and things like that. So that's the focus. That's why the focus on kindergarten through 5th. So as you can see, we have been very flat. So this chart goes back to the 2016-2017 school year. And over those past roughly 11 years, we have been, we've seen a little bit of wiggle up and down, of course, but overall we've been very flat. So despite the fact that lots of homes have sold and turned over in Monona, babies have been born, et cetera, we simply have not seen resident enrollment increase in any dramatic way. In fact, it's gone down most recently. In fact, you can see right now, as of this moment for the 26-27 year, we're nearly at the exact same resident enrollment that we were in the 16-17 year. We're at 459 students versus 457. This next chart shows the total enrollment at Winnequa for kindergarten through 5th grade, but now we're segregating it by open enrolled versus resident students. So the blue portion of each of these bars would match the previous slide. And then in addition, we've added the green part on the top of each bar to show the open enrolled students. So you can see, for example, that our enrollment peaked in the 23-24 school year, and that also happens to be the year that we had the most open enrolled students. And I think what this chart is helpful to understand is that the open enrollment trends at Winnequa have largely determined the size of the student population there over the years. And you can see that in the last few years, we've trended down on open enrollment, and that's been a deliberate choice. And going into the 26-27 year, where we have 55 students open enrolled, we're now getting back to a much similar position as we were in back in 2016-17, where they had 63 students open enrolled at Winnequa. So this chart is here to help the community understand the impact that open enrollment policy has on the enrollment at Winnequa.
I think it's important to note too, Philip, when we look at open enrollment and we look at feedback about the building feeling full. As I arrived in the district in the summer of 24, a lot of conversation was around how tight it felt at Winnequa. It continues to be a very high-performing school. We have really, really strong feedback from family and community about being highly engaged in that building as a 4K through 5th grade. So lots of love and care around that building, but also thinking about what is the just right capacity of that building. And as we were creeping, up in those 600s, it feels a little bit different. And so that's also a part of the conversation of really being conscientious about what is meeting the needs of our resident students in a building that already exists, as opposed to what feels maybe like crowdedness that is contributed to by our open enrollment, which is under our control.
Yeah, that's a great point. And actually, just to zoom in on that a little bit more, I think, it's such a tightrope walk when we talk about what's the ideal number of kids to have in a school. And I think, you don't want it to be too low and you don't want it to be too high, right? Because there's an energy that's lost when a building starts to be, down below, say, 75% capacity. And one of the things that I think actually makes Winnequa special is that it's a vibrant, full school. And you can feel that energy when you walk through the hallways and attend the events. And more kids bring more opportunities too, in terms of clubs and the kinds of after-school activities that you can support when you have enough kids to participate. One final point about open enrollment versus resident students is that when we talk about why the district may or may not want to have a certain number of open enrolled students, there's a dollar question there and a financial question, and the truth is we don't get as much funding per student for open enrolled students, and that's important. That's a critical thing to understand, that when we look at our funding calculations, we simply don't get as much money for each student that comes in through open enrollment, and so it's harder to properly fund the classrooms as they become increasingly filled with open enrolled students. But that's not the whole story there. There's other pressures put on a building when there's an increasing number of open enrolled students. For example, the auxiliary spaces, the music rooms, the art rooms, the cafeterias, et cetera, they all feel the pressure as well. Support staff, right? All the staff who support our teachers in our classrooms feel that pressure. Open enrolled students are also more likely to be driven to school because they don't live in a walkable distance. They're not nearby the school, and so there's additional pressure on the parking lots and the drop-off and pickup times. So there's a number of factors we consider when we think about how many open enrolled students we want to have as part of our student body.
And I think it's a great strategy when you think about making sure that our classrooms are operating at the goal. We don't want to be operating our classes too low. So it's a really good strategy to think about how do we get up to that class size goal per policy. So there's a lot of value of it, and we value the families that come to us as open enrollment, but we also have to balance that with fiscal responsibility of how much we're extending ourselves and making sure that it is within that space.
Yeah, and the final point I'll make is that when we make open enrollment decisions at this early grade level, at a school like Winnequa, we're making long-term decisions, right? Because we're bringing families and their children into our district who are going to be here mostly, for the next 10, 12 years. And, we don't want to undo those decisions, of course. Once we welcome a student into our student body, they're one of us, right? And so I think it's really critical for us to think about that. That these are decisions that school board or administration literally a decade from now will have to build around based on what was decided now. Okay, so this next slide, we're pivoting back to just looking at our resident students at Winnequa, so kindergarten through fifth grade, resident only. This is not including open enrolled students. And what we're doing here is we're stratifying those students by the type of residence that they live in. And what we're looking at is single-family homes versus apartments versus other types of housing. And so other could be condos, duplexes, et cetera. What we're really trying to tease out here is what proportion of our student body lives in a traditional single-family home versus apartments and other types of housing. This is important because most of Monona's growth is going to come from apartments. When you look at the zoning, the TIF districts, the kind of developments that are planned right now, particularly along the Broadway corridor, they are going to be apartment buildings. And so these are multi-level buildings, usually 4, 5, potentially 6, 7 stories, with 100 or more units, mostly studios, 1 bedrooms, with a few 2 bedrooms, potentially some 3 bedrooms, depending on the development. And what we wanted to look at was, historically, what proportion of our students come from those kinds of housing developments. And as you can see, a couple things from this chart. One is it's been pretty consistent. So as you go back, the proportion is pretty small. The vast majority of our students come from single-family homes. Doesn't necessarily mean that the homes are owned. They could be rented. But the key here is that the type of housing that produces students, by and large, at Winnequa tends to be single-family homes. As we look at new developments coming online, do we expect new students from those developments? Certainly. but we probably are not expecting very many because, Monona currently has something like 1,800 apartment units available. And yet we're only seeing in certain years, 40, 43 students coming from that type of housing. So I think looking at this historical data really helps us understand over time, where are our students living when they enter Winnequa and attend Winnequa. This next slide that shows some data, we wanted to specifically look at the Broadway corridor because a lot of the development that is planned for Monona is planned on the Broadway corridor, and even more specifically, it's the development where the Topgolf is going in towards the west end of Broadway. I think there's something like 600 to 700 units planned. And as best as we understand it, in talking with the city and the developer, it sounds like those new units are going to be very commensurate to the development at the current, which is the two. There's the current one and the current two, which are the two apartment developments in the area by the Yahara River, where Buck and Honey's is, and True Coffee. And so we wanted to look at those existing developments to see what kind of impact they have on our enrollment. And, again, not a crystal ball, but I think a decent proxy to help us understand, hey, if we add as a community and another 600 units down Broadway a little farther away, what kind of impact might we think those have? And so when you look at this data, you can see the first column there, this headered total, that's simply our resident students at Winnequa. So that's, again, kindergarten through fifth grade resident students. And then the next column over that has current one, current two, Yahara Terrace, and then total units 362. That's combining the two current buildings and the Yahara Terrace building, which is the apartment building that has the Waypoint restaurant beneath it, just a little bit east of the current development. So if you put those three buildings together, you've got 362 units. There's some 2 bedrooms, some 3 bedrooms across those developments. And you can see that across those 362 units over the years, we really don't see very many students. Right now, for next year, for example, there's 3 students coming out of all 362 units. Last year, there was 1, 2 the year prior to that, right? So, when we talk about an additional 600 units coming in west by Topgolf, we might expect, even if we're wrong by a factor of 2 or 3, 10, 15 more students coming from a development like that. The final column here that's labeled Broadway Lofts, 75 units, we plucked that out because the Broadway Loft development, which is across from Menards on the far east end of Broadway, is unique in the sense that it has some income restrictions and some rent controls on it, and it also has some ground level row-style townhouses. These are 3-bedroom townhouses with garages, and I think not surprisingly, those developments are producing more students, a greater ratio of students per unit. And so I think it's important to understand, what is being built, and that's why it's critical to know the kind of development that's planned along Broadway. And when we talk about Monona having, 1,000 units or 1,200 units planned over the next 10 years, knowing what those units are really matters because the type of unit, as you can see, has had a very different impact per unit.
And I think it's the type of unit and then also the price point. So when we're thinking about some of our apartment complexes that are going in, and they are marketed as luxury apartments, and a lot of them are lofts, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and a limited amount of 3-bedroom, that's also going to create a different number of students based on just size of apartment, cost of apartment, and what fits for a family, whatever that configuration of the family might be.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you pointed that out. So as an example, the new Bloom building that just opened up on the corner of Dean and Monona Drive is advertising its limited number of 3-bedroom apartments in a price range of $3,200 per unit all the way up to $4,500 per unit, last I checked. To contrast that, I believe Broadway Lofts advertises a 3-bedroom townhouse for something like $1,800 or $1,600. So vastly different target audiences, if you will. So I think that's a really terrific point. Before we jump into the next slide, which talks about births by year in Monona, I wanted to mention briefly that everything up until now has been school district data. So, one of the things that we wanted to do was take advantage of the data we already have. And obviously as a school district, when students enroll, we know what their primary address is. That's how we determine if they're a resident student or not. And so we actually, have a really a wealth of information just within the district that just needs some analysis applied to it. And so the slides up until this point have been basically data mining our own enrollment data over the past number of years. This slide, the source is the Wisconsin Department of Health Services, Division of Public Health, Office of Health Informatics. And so the state of Wisconsin tracks the city that the mother listed at the time of birth as her city of residence. And then starting in 2011, they also began tracking some more detailed information about the address. And so we were able to get data from the state where we could look at the number of births year over year going back to 2011 in the city of Monona. So critically, this is not birth rate, right? This is not births per 1,000 women or something like that. This is actually just the literal number of children born each year to parents in the city of Monona. And then the blue is single-family homes, meaning they lived in a single-family home at the time of birth, and then the green would be multifamily. I think this is a fairly obvious chart in the sense that you can see a swell in births in the city of Monona there in 2014, 15, 16, starts coming down a bit, 17, 18, 19, at least from a single family home perspective. But really over the last 7 years, year over year, it has dropped every year down to 36, where it was 36 actually 24 and 25. And so this is really showing, I think, a change in the number of babies being born to City of Monona residents. And that's really critical because, I think about the kids who end up at Winnequa come from really one of two places. Either are born here and continue to live here, or they move here after they were born, some point after they were born. And so a good portion of our student body is born here. And we can see from this trend where that's been heading. The other thing that's interesting here is 2025 actually, total births did go up for the first time in 6 or 7 years, but only with the multifamily. And I think, what's important about that is that kids who are born into a single family house are much more likely to still be here 4 or 5 years from now when they would enter Winnequa. Kids who are born into a multifamily housing are more likely to be transient, more likely to relocate prior to becoming school-aged kids. So, I think we would have more confidence in that uptick if more of those kids were born into single-family homes. This next slide here is the same data, but now we're just highlighting the rough cohort that would be at Winnequa today. So the 25-26 school year, the kids born between 2015 and 2020, right? So 2015 would roughly be your fifth graders. 2020 would roughly be your kindergarten, your 5K. And we put these brackets around it just to kind of help people narrow their focus into, this is the number of births that resulted in the student body we are experiencing right now. And then the next slide after this, we did the same thing, but we're projecting out now. We're kind of saying, so, the births from 2015 to 2020 is what we're dealing with now. 2020 through 2025 births, this is who will be at Winnequa a few years from now in the 2030, 2031 school year. And I say roughly because, the cutoff for each school year is September 1st. So these are roughly the cohorts. But I think taken in aggregate, it's a good way to understand, what we expect to see. The only way we would compensate for this is with a significant shift in migration to the city. There would have to be a dramatic increase in people moving here with children compared to what we've seen over the years to compensate for the pretty severe drop-off in births.
And those birth rates, I think people are questioning that. And as we look at data from around the country, it's a nationwide. We are seeing a decline in birth rates for a lot of different reasons, and you can read about it. So we're not unique to that. Even when we look at birth rates in Cottage Grove, their birth rates have decreased. and we're just part of that bigger conversation.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We're seeing this everywhere. The state is reporting it at a state level. And I guess the other thing too that people should remember is in the same, take the 10 years from 2015 to 2025, where we've seen a precipitous drop in babies being born in the city of Monona. During that same time frame, we have seen an increase in population. So despite the fact that the population of Monona continues to grow and has grown since 2015, we're still seeing this drop. All right, so this next slide with a pie chart on it, what we wanted to show here, and this was I think an interesting data point for us, was to say, we know that Monona has roughly 2,400 single-family homes. And this is, I think, interesting for Monona in particular because Monona is not going to see very many more, if any, right? Because we're landlocked. We will potentially see more apartments, but we're likely not going to see any sort of dramatic shift in the number of single-family homes in Monona. And we wanted to see what portion of those homes send kids to Winnequa. And so currently, in the current school year, about 300 out of 2,400 homes account for our enrollment at Winnequa. So about 13%. I think it's a smaller number than we thought. I would not have guessed until we looked at the data that this is what it would have been. And I think this is also important to understand because when we talk about home sales and we talk about home turnover and things like that, if only 13% of our homes send kids to the school at any point in time, then, if you sell 10 homes, you sell 50 homes, et cetera, generally speaking, you could apply that same percentage and expect that, and we did look at that, and it's pretty similar. A small percentage of those homes end up sending kids to Winnequa down the line.
I think another thing that's interesting about this data is it brought up the concept of market share. And really, how are we capturing as many students that live in the district as resident students? And we capture around 80% of the market share, which statistically in school districts is pretty good. When we look at where our kids go if they're not here, we have a chunk that go to parochial schools, and families that choose the parochial school route have very strong reasons for that, and they're typically not reasons that a public school system can compete with. The other thing is open enrollment out, and when we look at what open enrollment out looks like, it's primarily families wanting a virtual option, and so they are choosing to open enroll out typically to Wisconsin virtual school, and so those are again things that we really can't compete with. So last year we started doing some data collection from families that are choosing not to send their students here, and our timing wasn't great, so we'll do it again this fall to really find out where our families are going if they're not coming to us, and see if we can continue to recruit families, because we want everybody we can serve, and then also just making sure that we're getting the market share.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's a good opportunity, I think, to remind everyone that enrollment drives our revenue as a district. It drives our budget. And so, it's not just about thinking about the capacity of, say, Winnequa, right? And what we should do about that, or how we should be concerned about that. It's also, thinking about in future years, are we going to have to tighten certain things in the budget and react to that decreasing enrollment? Because that has implications for the choices that we can make and how we should be planning and what we should be prioritizing. So I think that's the other thing that everyone should always keep in mind is the capacity and what does that look like for a given building is certainly an important conversation, but then just strictly whether or not we are growing as a district, staying flat, or in fact slightly declining in enrollment, that has other implications from a financial perspective as well.
I think there's studies that have just come out that all of the Dane County districts are experiencing either flat or declining enrollment, with the exception of McFarland, and McFarland is the one that they house the Wisconsin Virtual Academy.
Yep. Yeah, and I think similar to that cap time slide earlier in the presentation, Dane County is, last I understood, it was either the first or second fastest growing region in the state, right? And yet we're still seeing drops in enrollment across Dane County. So, we've mentioned this a few times, but this is not unique to Monona. This is a trend we're seeing everywhere. We wanted to pull in some some MLS data to try to look at home sales, because like I mentioned before, when we talk about our resident students at Winnequa, it's really driven by kids who are born here and continue to live here, and kids who move here. And if you take these slides in combination, it starts to tell a story. Individual slides maybe not so much, but when you go back and you remember that the vast majority of our students live in single-family homes, well, then the next question you ask is, okay, how many single-family homes are selling and turning over, right? Because the only way for a student to come into the district if they aren't born here is to move here. And so we wanted to look at that data to see what kind of trends there are there. And if you look at this, you can see that if you go back to 2015, there was a lot of homes sold that year. It was definitely a big year for home sales, almost 120. And then the last few years we've been down. 2025 clipped up a little bit compared to 24 and 23, but the overall trend is down. You can look at that trend line. But I think that we shouldn't read in too much to this, but I think the key takeaways here are, one, homes sell every year in Monona, right? And for many years, going back over the past 10, 11 years, there's been anywhere between 80 and 100 homes sold year over year. And that has generally been the trend. It's dropped in the last 3, but it's, maybe we'll go back up. But I think the point is we've been there before, right? Even if we see a fairly significant increase back up to that 80, 90, 100 homes per year, we've been there. The community's had that kind of turnover in many of the years past, and yet we have continued to see relatively flat resident enrollment. So I think what that tells us is that home sales is certainly an important indicator, but it doesn't necessarily move the needle in a tremendous way. The next slide, may help explain a little bit why we've seen some of the drop. But again, we're not real estate experts, and I don't think we, need to speculate too much on this. But we did think it was interesting to look at if you hone in on just 3-bedroom homes under 2,500 square feet that sold for less than $750,000, just to trim off that one end of the bell curve that might include some lake homes and really expensive homes. You can see the average price of that type of home has nearly doubled in the past decade or so. And I think, I don't think this is news to anybody that the housing market has become much more difficult to participate in, particularly in communities like Monona that are popular and are landlocked and are not going to grow in terms of housing stock. So I think there's some distinct barriers probably between housing prices, interest rates being up compared to what they were 10 years ago, particularly for folks who are earlier on in their journey, right? Maybe buying their first home, the kind of people who are typically going to be, either having children in the near future or just had them. I think this adds a little bit of color to maybe what we're seeing trend-wise. So before we move on, just a quick summary. So the past number of slides, like I said at the beginning, were really our attempt at the district level through collaboration, with district staff and data mining district data, and then trying to pull in the birth data and the MLS data. We really wanted to make sure that as we think about these facilities decisions and budgetary decisions, that we have as much of an understanding of the inputs to our community and our district, and especially Maywood and Winnequa, so that we can be as informed as possible. But I think importantly, so the community can as well, and that's part of why we're here today. Is we're trying to make sure that the community has as clear of an understanding of sort of the topography of the past 10 to 15 years of data that we're able to pull together as we think about this stuff.
All right, let's shift gears and head out to the other side of the district and talk about Cottage Grove. In this slide, you can see we have some students per housing unit projection calculations. This came from when the board and the administration were looking at Taylor Prairie and Cottage Grove schools and neighborhood schools. And different than Monona, Cottage Grove has a lot of open space. So you see lots of shovels in the ground, and some of them are apartments, some are duplexes, some are townhouses, some are single family homes. And so when a development comes to the city council and the village council, and they start to have a conversation about putting that in, this chart really helps us say, okay, what would that mean for us for enrollment? And so it's been interesting because we don't have these numbers for Monona yet, but it's falling in line very similar. So when they come forward and say, we want to put 100 houses in, there'll be single-family homes, small to mid-sized lots. We know that we're going to get about 14 kids at elementary school for every 100 homes. And as you can see, similarly, the different types of rental properties or apartments also, will yield some children, but the point in which they yield children isn't as much. So when we look at a 3 to 4 unit multifamily home, we may get, if there was 100 of them, we would get 8 kids. And so this really helps us think about, as projects are coming online for building, what we need to be thinking about in the future and how do we accommodate for those things.
These slides outline the district's current and future elementary grade configurations.
So as just a standard part of our process, every year we monitor what our current enrollment is, and then we use that current enrollment as a cast forward projection and a calculation. And so this slide just really looks district-wide between 4K and 12th grade of where we predict we will see students by grade level in the whole district. And then as you look at our resident enrollments, we do see a little bit of uptick in resident enrollment predicted by 2030, definitely offset by the declining number of open enrollment seats. So it does show we have some decrease in total enrollment, but this is how we plan forward, we budget, we think about the next 5 years. So as we've talked about capital plans and different things, making sure that we have a good handle on what do we expect to see from enrollment in the next 5 years, because that's where our budget projections come from. These next few slides are going to outline per building and look at a number of things: resident enrollment, open enrollment, total enrollment, occupancy, and capacity. So one of the conversations we've been having district-wide is, what is the capacity of the school? And capacity takes into a couple things. It takes into how many physical classrooms that you have to serve students in, but then also common spaces. And one of the things that gets tricky in a school district that's been around for quite a while is you have buildings, that were built in the 50s that are quite efficient. They have lots of great classroom space. Common spaces don't look the same as if you were to build a building in 2022. And so wanting to get a better handle on that district-wide. So you can see this past year at Taylor Prairie, we had 225 students enrolled. 4K only come to school half day, so there was 178 students in the building at one time, and the capacity was 346. So again, running at about 50% capacity, which begins to enter into things. One, just efficiency of running a building that is half full, and then the other piece is just the feel of the building and the vibrancy of that. Cottage Grove, looking at that also, very similar conversation that we have. And as you could see this year, they ran about 54% capacity. As we just covered, historically, Taylor Prairie and Cottage Grove School operated as 2 separate schools, and families transitioned between 4K and kindergarten in one building and then first and second at another building. This is now going to be consolidated for the 26-27 school year, where all Cottage Grove area students in grade 4K through 2 will attend Cottage Grove School.
So this adjustment allows the district to consolidate programming into one elementary building at Cottage Grove, which improves operational efficiency and continues to support students and staff in the community.
The consolidation also creates opportunities for stronger collaboration among staff and provides students with greater continuity during their early elementary years by keeping those grades together in one location. And I think it's important to note that prior to this discussion, the discussion was creating neighborhood schools to do that. But as we looked at the buildings running at 50-ish% capacity, we brought forward the conversation to the board about, for now, bringing the students together.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And from a facilities perspective, the district also, of course, is looking at how this configuration aligns with projected enrollment and building capacity moving forward.
This slide focuses on Granite Ridge School and its configuration serving grades 3 through 5.
As part of the district's review process, the board examined how Granite Ridge's current utilization compares with projected enrollment trends over time.
Understanding available capacity helps the district evaluate whether buildings are appropriately sized for long-term enrollment patterns and whether adjustments may improve capacity or educational programming. As we look at Winnequa School, which we've talked quite a bit about Monona projected enrollment, this is where our current numbers and rolling forward look at. First of all, this year we had been looking at building capacity, and as we asked for that to get re-looked at by the architect, it came back in at 719 based on the remodeling that was done a few years ago. In conversation with administration and with the board, we did make the recommendation to reset that capacity back at 644 as it had been. Winnequa is also a school who has the difference between enrollment and occupancy because 4K is not always in the building. So one group in the morning, one group in the afternoon, but they're counted as a whole child for enrollment. So next year, we look at the total enrollment being 555 is kind of our estimated enrollment, but 535 kids would be in the building at any one moment if every kid came to school that day, which would be like a dream.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this slide highlights MG21, which serves students in grades 6 through 12 as part of the charter school model.
Part of the utilization review included understanding how that specialized programming at MG21 Charter School fits within the district's overall capacity footprint and long-term planning considerations.
Okay, so now we're looking at Glacial Drumlin School, which serves middle school students in grades 6 through 8.
Middle school enrollment trends are also an important part of that long-range planning because they help inform us for future staffing, programming, and space utilization across the district.
We reviewed current enrollment alongside projected trends to evaluate how effectively the building aligns with anticipated student populations in the coming years.
The final building slide focuses on Monona Grove High School.
As with the other schools, the district analyzed current enrollment, projected enrollment trends, and available capacity within the building.
High schools also represent unique planning considerations because they support a wide range of academic programming, extracurricular opportunities, career and technology, educational spaces, athletics, and student support services.
Reviewing utilization at the high school level helps ensure the district can continue supporting those opportunities while also planning responsibly for long-term sustainability and future student needs.
As we begin wrapping up the presentation, we want to return again to the district's strategic priorities.
Every facilities conversation ultimately comes back to supporting students, staff, families, and the long-term sustainability of the district.
These discussions can be complex and emotional because our schools are deeply connected to our communities. At the same time, we have a responsibility to carefully evaluate how district resources are being used and how we plan for the future.
These efforts to pull data together are obviously really important, and they're never finished. We're going to continue to seek out new and different data sets that we can get our hands on to try to make the most informed decisions that we possibly can. And I think to the point made a minute ago about the emotional nature of some of these decisions, no matter what we do, whether it's keeping a building, selling a building, et cetera, we have to be sure. We have to be as certain about that decision as we can, because no matter which way we go, there's an impact. There's an impact potentially fiscally if we go one way, potentially from a capacity perspective if we go another way. So it's really important that we can feel secure in our understanding of where we're headed so that we can make as informed decisions as we possibly can.
And I think, Philip, one of the things that we've talked about is I'd love to be wrong. Every student that we serve creates dollars, and those dollars are what sustain the district and the services. And so our priority right now is to monitor our enrollment really closely. Every day we look at it for what we're anticipated to have on September 1st, and we adjust accordingly and continue to want to really provide the best services we can for kids inside of the context in which we operate.
Yeah, that's a terrific point. Nobody wants enrollment to go down. We are all hoping for enrollment to go up. However, we need to be careful that we can react if it does flatline or go down, because that has important implications.